Aaron here, BeltFeds.com. We're going to do a video series on field modified M60s in Vietnam. This is an important historic aspect of this weapon system. You know, this was the primary machine gun for all the branches throughout the war. And we saw a lot of different field modifications done to it by the guys that used these. They did these modifications to make these as efficient as possible in combat. You know, during the Vietnam War, there was a lot more leeway to do that than there is today. And it's interesting to see the different things that they did and just how forward thinking a lot of them were. Just like the C ration can on the side of this. That was a field modification. So in this video, we're going to specifically talk about this setup here. And this setup is unique to Navy Helicopter Squadron HAL 3. HAL 3 to this day is still the most decorated Navy squadron to ever exist. And they operated several detachments in Vietnam. They operated B-model, underpowered B-model Huey gunships. And they were very specific in how they set up and deployed these door guns, and also in how they set up and deployed the armament systems on their aircraft. So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to go over what these modifications are and why they did them. So let's get this on the bench.
Roger, Charlie's calling you. That's 3-1, go. Roger, refueling pad. Roger, it's refueling at Benlock. It's just to the south of the Sandy area there. You can see it as 2709 asphalt pad. Roger that. Okay, Clark. Does it have a control? I want you to repeat. When I say throw, I want you to throw it exactly when I say throw. I'm going to drop in there, see if I can get it.
All right, we have two M60s on the bench here. We, of course, have our field modified gun, which we were just speaking about. And then we have a standard ground gun here in the back, which is typically how these guns were issued in Vietnam. They did have a door gun variant of this with spade grips, which would go to Huey crews, but that was typically for H model crews, the slicks, the longer version of the helicopters. The gunship crews, for the most part, were given standard ground guns. Now they did also get spade grip guns if they wanted them or needed them, or depending on the specific application and specific mission that they were running. But for the purposes of this video, we have our standard ground gun for reference, because we're going to go over just the differences between the two of these. We're going to start front to back. All right. So the first thing we're going to notice here is these barrels are obviously different. Well, what's the difference in this? The difference is this does not have a bipod, and it also does not have a front sight post. And the reason it is because this is for an M60C. An M60C is a solenoid operated flex gun that was mounted on the side of gunships, specifically earlier on in the war, and controlled by the co-pilot. These barrels were unique to that setup, which is why they made them, and they never had a front sight post or a bipod on them. There's a couple different reasons why the guys in HAL 3, and for the most part, most door gunners, preferred this type of barrel. The obvious reason, first of all, is weight. This is a lot of weight on the front of the gun that those guys didn't need, especially the gunship crews. They were free gunning these. They were not mounted. That changed eventually at some point in the war where they had to mount them. But for the majority of the war, they free gunned these. And that took a lot of weight off the front of this. And also, you know, when you are flying in a helicopter at a very fast speed, this bipod is like a wind catcher. You know, you're fighting the wind, and by removing the bipod, it's easier to get on target and stay on target. And it just takes one more factor out of the equation when you're trying to efficiently deploy this gun. So these C barrels are unique to the air units. HAL 3 were obviously air units, and they were able to acquire these for their door guns. And that's a whole nother fascinating aspect of the entire war, not just specifically HAL 3, but all the units on how they were able to acquire certain things. You know, I spoke with a Vietnam vet, Michael Merrill, and he was an infantry lieutenant, and he was able to acquire a 50 cal by trading beer for it. And there's a lot of stories like that, and that's fascinating. So that's the front of the gun here. Now let's move back to this portion, the trunnion portion, and then we'll come back up to the handguard. We can see on a standard ground gun they have a carry handle and they have a rear sight. Again, that's just additional weight that these guys didn't need. All right, they're not using the sights; they're walking their rounds in through tracer fire. And the carry handle, same thing. They're not bungeeing this; they're free gunning it, and they just didn't need that. So they stripped those two things off. Now, of course, we see this on the side of the handguard. This is a stripped standard M60 trigger group that they removed all of the components from, and they used a pipe clamp to strap this to the handguard. It, of course, serves as a forward pistol grip. Having a forward pistol grip it sounds obvious to most of us that are firearms enthusiasts, but it just allowed them to have better control of the gun, and it also allowed them to have better control of the gun in the way that they held this gun. So that leads to the next question. Why is it that they held this gun in the way that they did? Well, there was a couple reasons to it, according to the guys in the unit that I've spoken with and I'm friends with. It gave them a better field of fire. It was more maneuverable. And also, they believed that the gun fed more efficiently that way. And by the pictures, you're like, wow, the belt coming over the top cover is more efficient. And yes, it was. Okay, it ejected the casings and links straight out of the gun. Straight down out of the gun instead of into the cabin. Anyone that's shot these M60s, especially when you factor in airspeed and other things like that, this has a tendency when it ejects brass to sometimes have the brass pop back in the chamber, causing like a stovepipe or double feed. And if you're holding the gun with the ejection port facing up, you always run that risk. All right, with the ejection port facing down, like we are showing in these photographs, again, the brass is ejecting straight down, and it's not an issue as far as stuff getting back into the chamber. So more efficiency. When we keep going back here, we see a metal cap on the end of this. Let me move the gun up. This is an aluminum butt cap. That aluminum butt cap is an M60C, which is a flex gun used on gunship, butt cap. It's very light, and it was used again on the specific M60s that were controlled by the co-pilot. They were fixed mounted on the side of the aircraft, just like we showed you earlier in this video. And they found this to be more effective. It's much less weight, drastically less weight. And for the positions that they shot these from, they could rest this on their shoulder, and it was just as easy to deploy as opposed to having a buttstock on. And if you look closely at some of these photographs that we put in, a lot of times they didn't even have anything on the back. They would just have a buffer sticking out. And again, that reduces even more weight. So, and it also could come down to how difficult these were to find during the war. It's not like they could just, put a wish list in and get whatever they wanted. They had to acquire this stuff. So that is how HAL 3 set these guns up, as you saw in some of these videos and some of these pictures. It's just very unique. And what's neat about this is it's consistent. These guys, they figured out what was most effective for their mission. They set their helicopters up that way. They set their M60 door guns up that way. And then before they left Vietnam, they passed this knowledge on. And we can see in the photos of them actually doing in-country unit training, going over different tactics and how to properly deploy this specific variation of the M60. So that is the short and sweet of it. It's just interesting to see how some of these guys thought outside of the box and did what they had to do to be combat effective. That today, modifications to these guns is not a thing, and in my experience in the military, it was not allowed or tolerated. So I hope this video was informative, and thanks for watching.